The wreck was still burning when Davin Holt reached it. He came down the ridge alone, the way he always came down to these places, field kit slung over one shoulder, the portable compression torch clipped to his belt, 2 water canisters because out here you never knew. The smoke rose black and slow against the gray pre-dawn of Kessara III, and the smell of it reached him before he cleared the last switchback. Scorched hull plate, ruptured fuel cells, something that wasn't exactly metal and wasn't exactly flesh, and landed somewhere between the two. He'd been an emergency systems technician with the Outer Reach Salvage Authority for 11 years. He knew the smell of a crash site the way a doctor knows the smell of a hospital, absorbed it on the first day, cataloged it without choosing to, filed it somewhere deep where things go that you can't unlearn. He did not slow down. The ship was a Varath-class interceptor military configuration, based on the angled strake geometry and the weapon hardpoints he could count from 200 meters out. It had come in at an angle skidding rather than falling, which meant the pilot had been alive and conscious long enough to try to correct. That was good. That meant there might still be something to correct for. The cockpit section had sheared away from the fuselage and come to rest against a boulder field near the bottom of the ravine. The hull had accordioned on the right side. The emergency lighting system had failed, but the secondary indicator strips were still pulsing amber, then dark, then amber again in the deep shadow under the main section. Davin crouched at the edge of what had been the entry ramp and scanned the interior with his light. She was inside. She was sitting with her back against the navigator's console, which had partially collapsed, and she had one hand pressed flat against the side of it, bracing herself or steadying herself, he couldn't tell yet. Her other arm was across her chest. Her head was up. He registered the rest in pieces, the armor first because it was hard to miss. Varath military issue, he thought, though he'd only seen it in tactical reports and the occasional intelligence brief, deep black composite with iridescent edge sheen that shifted between green and blue depending on the light. Full combat configuration, helmet still sealed. The chest piece had taken a significant impact. The right side was dented inward and the shoulder articulation had buckled, locking the joint. Her left hand was bare, the gauntlet lost somewhere in the crash. Her right arm was trapped at her side by the collapsed panel. And the armor wouldn't open. He could see it from here. The emergency release panels on the chest and the shoulder had both triggered partway. The shoulder release had jammed mid-sequence. The chest latch had popped, but the interior mechanism had seized. The suit had tried to respond and couldn't complete it, which meant she'd been in there, in sealed armor in a burning wreck, unable to get herself out. For however long it had taken him to come down the ridge. He was already moving. "I see you," he said loudly and clearly because she hadn't moved yet and he needed to know what he was dealing with. "I'm Davin Holt, Outer Reach Salvage Authority. I'm coming in. I'm not armed." She moved. Not much, a turn of the head, tracking the beam of his light. He couldn't see her face through the visor. But the hand against the console pressed harder and her spine straightened, which told him 2 things. She was conscious enough to respond to external input, and she was the kind of person who straightened her spine when a stranger came through the door. He filed that too. He got inside and went to work. The collapsed panel was the first problem. He got the compression torch on the lower edge of it and worked the joint carefully, not burning through, just warming the collapsed seam enough to get a manual purchase on it. It took 7 minutes. When it gave fast, and he caught it with his shoulder and held it while he repositioned. She watched him the entire time. Still hadn't spoken. He'd dealt with crash survivors before and he knew what the silence meant. It wasn't unconscious. It wasn't shock frozen. It was the silence of someone assessing. She was figuring out what he was. "This is going to take a while," he said, setting the panel down carefully and moving to look at the armor. Up close, the damage to the chest piece was worse than he'd thought. The impact had driven the lower edge of the right pauldron into the release channel. "Are you in pain?" A pause. Then, in a voice that came through the suit's internal speaker system, still apparently functional, "Define pain." He glanced up at the visor. Nothing back but his own reflection in the amber light. "Bones," he said, "ribs especially, spine, neck." "The neck is intact." Another pause. "The rest is a matter of degree." "Okay." He crouched in front of her and looked at the chest latch. "I'm going to open this. The shoulder is jammed, I'll get to that second. Do you have an internal read on your suit's oxygen status?" 41 minutes at current rate. It has been, she stopped. It has been longer than I would have chosen to wait. Longer than I would have chosen to wait. He stored that too. "Then let's not wait anymore," he said, and got to work on the chest. The chest latch took 20 minutes. The internal mechanism had seized because the impact had fractured one of the secondary lock pins, which had then dropped sideways across the release channel and held everything in place. It was the kind of failure that looked catastrophic and was actually solvable if you had fine tools and patience, and the right angle, which Davin had two of and had to find the third. He talked while he worked, not because he needed to fill the silence, he was comfortable with silence, but because her oxygen was ticking down and he wanted her to know precisely what he was doing and why and how long each step would take. It helped in his experience. People were calmer when they understood the sequence. She answered when it was efficient to do so and was silent when it wasn't, which he found he liked. At minute 14 she said, "You are the only human I have spoken to." He was running a micro driver through the access panel on the left side of the chest piece. "Before this, you mean?" "Directly before this." "What were your impressions?" A pause that felt like a considered one, preliminary. He got the micro driver into position. Fair. The pin shifted at minute 20 and the chest latch released with a sound like a caught breath exhaling. He got both hands on the chest piece and lifted it clear, and the suit's internal atmosphere mixed with the outside air, and he got his first real look at her face. She was Varath. He'd guessed that from the ship, but seeing it was different from guessing. Her skin was the deep amber bronze of the Varath northern caste, the kind of color that looked lit from inside, though right now it was damp and pale with effort and something that was probably pain. Her eyes were large, as Varath eyes tended to be, set at a slight angle, and the iris color was the dark gold that shifted in low light toward amber and in bright light toward something close to copper. Her hair was pressed flat against her skull from the helmet, dark, almost black, with the braid wrap that Varath officers wore knotted at the back. Her jaw was set. She looked at him with those gold-dark eyes, with the direct, measuring quality of someone who was accustomed to being looked at, and had decided it was not going to be permitted to unsettle her. "Your shoulder," he said. "Let me get the toolkit." "I know what you are doing," she said. It was not an accusation, more like a clarification. "You are mapping me." He pulled the toolkit closer. "I'm making sure I don't hurt you more than the crash already did." "That," she said, "is not exclusively what you are doing." He looked up. Her expression had not changed, still set, still direct, but there was something in it that might have been dry, might have been almost wry. "No," he said, "not exclusively." He got to work on the shoulder. The shoulder took longer. The pauldron had buckled into the release mechanism at an angle that made straight-line access impossible, so he had to work in sequence, loosen the outer buckle first, decompress the secondary joint, then get to the actual release. Her arm was completely locked during all of this. She couldn't shift it, couldn't turn it, couldn't put it down. He was aware, the whole time, that she was sitting there enduring something and not saying so. "You can tell me if something hurts," he said, working the outer buckle. "I am aware of that." "Okay." Silence he worked. "Then you told me your name." "Davin Holt." "Why?" He glanced up. "Because I was coming into a crash site in the dark, and I thought you should know who was arriving." She was watching him with those copper-gold eyes. That is not the only reason. He thought about it. No, I suppose I also thought it might help, knowing someone's name when you've been stuck for a while. The light shifted. The amber indicator strips pulsed once and then steadied, and in the steadier light he could see her more clearly. There was a cut on her temple above the right ear that had dried. There were the beginnings of significant bruising along the right side of her jaw. Her neck had been straight the entire time. He'd noticed that early and kept noticing it. Her spine, too. Whatever pain was happening, she had decided it was not going to show, and so it wasn't showing, and he found himself profoundly certain that this was not performance for his benefit. This was just what she was. "Varath," she said, "Commander Eva Sarath, 3rd Fleet, Northern Reach Division." He repeated it back to her. Not to confirm, she didn't need him to confirm it, but because she had given it and it deserved acknowledgement. "Davin Holt," he said, 11 years ORSA. Before that, Engineering Corps. "Which branch?" "Meridian Light Infantry, 5 years, mostly structural demolition and field repair." He got the outer buckle free and moved to the secondary joint. "Not combat. I was always the one who came after." She was quiet for a moment. "The after is harder," she said, "in different ways." He didn't disagree. The secondary joint released at the 40-minute mark, and the shoulder armor came free at 47. When it did, when the last locked piece came away and she could move her right arm for the first time since the crash, she moved it slowly. A controlled, deliberate motion. Not the unthinking, reflexive freedom of someone whose pain had just lifted, but the careful test of someone making sure the damage assessment was accurate. She extended the arm, flexed the fingers, brought the arm across to her chest and pressed once. Then she let it rest. He was watching. He'd told himself he wasn't, but he was. There was a quality to people who had survived things and did not want anyone to know they had survived them. He'd met it before in the Engineering Corps, in 11 years of aftermath, and it always had the same signature. The careful inventory of the body, the refusal to show relief, the way attention was redirected immediately to the practical problem rather than the thing that had just been solved. She did all of this with the unself-conscious fluency of someone for whom it was simply the baseline. He sat back and let her have the moment without watching her have it. He made a point of looking at the suit components laid out on the cockpit floor instead, cataloging the damage to the shoulder assembly with the clinical attention he could sustain without much effort. "What," she said, "is your assessment?" "Of what?" "Of the extent of the damage. You have been mapping it. What are your conclusions?" He sat back on his heels and thought about it honestly. Cracked ribs, minimum 2 on the right side. Possibly 3, you were favoring the left through most of that work and you're still doing it, just more subtly now. Possible crack in the right clavicle or significant bruising that I can't distinguish without imaging. The arm itself, I think, is intact. You're moving it too well for a fracture above the wrist. Shoulder has taken significant impact, but the joint moved clean just now, which is good. Your face, he stopped. The cut on your temple is superficial. The bruising on your jaw will be considerable. You've got subcutaneous bleeding across the right side of your neck from the collar impact. It'll color up over the next 24 hours and it'll look worse than it is, but it'll look significant. She nodded. Accurate. How accurate? The ribs are 3. I have been counting them for the past hour. A pause. The clavicle, I agree, is uncertain. The collar impact I was not aware of. You can't see the back of your own neck, he said, and it wouldn't have hurt much yet. It will. She absorbed this without comment. He reached into his field kit and pulled out a cold compress and a sealed wound pack. Can I? Yes. He pressed the compress carefully against the right side of her ribs through her flight suit, which had torn along the right side and left the underlying material exposed, and watched her receive it without flinching. He opened the wound pack and got the coagulant strip onto the temple cut, working carefully with both hands, and she held still for that too. He was close enough doing this to be aware of her very specifically. The particular set of her jaw when something hurt and she chose not to say so, the precise way her eyes tracked him, not as a threat, not anymore, but as something she was still determining the dimensions of. The armor had carried its own smell, metal and charged circuitry, and the particular chemical signature of a sealed environment suit under combat load, but with the chest piece off and the shoulder off, she smelled of something underneath all that. Mineral clean, faintly, like ozone and deep stone. It was native, not added, just what she was. She was not looking away. He sat back and gave her the room she'd had before. "Your crew," he said. "I was alone, a beat. I fly alone when there is a reason to fly alone." He didn't ask about the reason. "Is there someone I should contact?" "There is someone who will have already noticed." Her voice was even. "My locator will have transmitted upon impact. There will be a retrieval team within." She paused. "Considerable time has passed." "About 2 hours since the crash, based on what I can read from the hull temps." "Then they will be approximately 4 hours behind you." Her eyes moved to his. "You arrived first." "I was close." "Or you moved quickly." "Both," he said. She studied him for a long moment. He let her. He was aware that this was something. He wasn't entirely sure yet what to call it. She had a presence that was simply large, even injured, even in a wrecked cockpit with her armor in pieces on the floor. Not the presence of command performance, the studied kind, but the presence of someone who had been exactly who she was for a very long time and was not available to be otherwise. He respected it without having to think about it. "You were in engineering corps," she said. "Then salvage." "Yes." "Why salvage?" He thought about it, the true answer or the short answer. He decided she would prefer the true one. "Because I got tired of the before," he said. "The engineering corps was mostly preparation. We showed up, we built the thing, we handed it off, and we never saw what it actually did. Salvage is aftermath. I like aftermath. You can see what actually happened." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You can see what survived." He looked at her. "Yes. That is a different orientation than most." "It's mine," he said. She looked at him with those copper-dark eyes for a long moment. The amber lights pulsed once. Outside, in the ravine, the burning hull was settling. He could hear it, the low structural groan of metal cooling unevenly. And somewhere above them, the first light of Kessara III's dawn was beginning to touch the ridge. "The compress is helping," she said. "Not thank you, not quite, but offered." "Good," he said. They stayed in the wreck a few more minutes while he finished his evaluation of the floor integrity, whether the remaining hull sections were stable enough to move through without risk. He tested the main beam with his boot, checked the angle of the collapsed ramp against the wind direction, listened to the metal. "You are listening to the ship," she said. "Yes." "What does she tell you?" He thought about it. That she's done, but that she held together long enough. The cockpit section came down clean. The separation happened at a stress point that was doing its job, failing where it was designed to fail. It wasn't a catastrophic failure. The ship made a decision in a way. Eva was quiet for a moment, then quietly, "Yes, that is accurate." He looked at her. She was looking at the remains of the forward instrument panel, and her expression had the particular quality of someone saying goodbye to something, without letting anyone see them do it. He gave her that too. He got her out at the 3rd hour. Not easily. The cockpit floor had buckled in a way that required careful cutting, and once he had her on her feet, the cracked ribs made it slow going across the uneven ground. She did not ask for his arm. He offered it once and she declined, not with offense but with the clean directness of someone who had made a decision, and did not require the offer to be made again. He respected that too. But the ground was rough and the light was still gray, and somewhere between the hull and the first clear stretch of flat stone, She hit a patch of unstable scree and her balance went. His hand was there before he thought about it. Not catching her, she didn't fall. Just his hand at her elbow there steady, a point of contact she could use or ignore. She used it. Just for a moment, just long enough to re-establish the ground under her, and then she straightened and he let go. But the contact had happened, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything about it. He got them out of the wreck and into the open air. The light was coming in properly now, full dawn filling the ravine with the particular gray gold of Kessara III mornings, and he stood for a moment looking at the hull, reading the settlement, listening for any further shift. The back section was stable. The cockpit section had moved as far as it was going to move. He took his read of it, stored it, and turned to find her standing behind him doing the same thing with different instruments, which were her eyes and whatever those 7 years of command had taught them to read. "Clear," he said. "Clear," she agreed. He set up the field shelter near the base of the ravine wall, out of the wind, flat ground, a clear line of sight to the ridgeline so the retrieval team would see them without difficulty. The shelter was minimal and functional. A ground cover, 2 folded seat pads, the small utility frame he could erect one-handed in under 3 minutes. She watched him do it without offering to help, and he didn't ask, because she was bracing 3 cracked ribs and had been doing it without complaint for going on 3 hours, and the most useful thing he could do for her now was not manufacture additional tasks for her to decline. She sat when the shelter was ready. He made tea. It was the kind of practical thing he did without making a ceremony of it. The small folded kit came out of the pack. The water was already warm from the heating element he kept running as standard, and he made 2 cups and set one near her without comment. She picked it up. They sat with the ravine cooling around them and the dawn coming in from the east, and they were quiet for a while. The good kind of quiet, not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people who had just done something significant together and didn't need to narrate it. "You keep watching the ridge," he said. "I keep watching the ridge," she agreed. Force of habit, she didn't explain it. "You don't." "I'm watching the hull. For settlement pattern. I want to know if anything else is going to shift before the team gets here." She turned slightly and looked at the wreck. He watched her look at it, the long, assessing look of someone taking inventory of a loss. The ship was done. That much was obvious. Even at this distance you could read the structural failure, the way the back third had concertinaed on impact, the angle of the cockpit separation. "She was 8 years old," she said. He looked at the wreck and then back at her. "The ship. Commissioned 8 years ago. I took command of her on the 5th year." She drank from the cup. "I know that is a very short relationship by some measures." "Not by mine," he said. She looked at him, he looked back at her. The dawn light was warmer now, reaching the floor of the ravine in long angles, and in it her skin had the amber-lit quality he'd noticed in the cockpit, more vivid now than in the emergency strip's cold glow, the deep bronze with the warmth inside it. She was not what he'd expected, though he'd have struggled to name what he'd expected. She was specific, was what she was, present in a way that required no particular effort and no particular performance. "You are a strange man," she said, not an insult, more like a preliminary finding, a category being revised. "In what way?" "You arrived at a crash site alone in the dark, with a field kit and a portable torch. You spent nearly 2 hours on a single armor joint without complaint. You make tea without asking if it is wanted." She paused. "You did not ask me what I was doing here." "That's your business," he said. "I am a military commander in sealed combat armor who crashed a Varath interceptor on a civilian salvage authority outpost moon. Most people would ask." "Most people aren't here," he said. "I am. What I needed to know was whether you were in pain, what was trapping you, and whether anything in the wreck was going to fall on us while I worked." She was quiet for a moment, and now I'd like to know if the ribs are worse when you breathe deep or only on impact. She breathed in slowly, deliberately. Something crossed her face, controlled but present. Not allowed out entirely, but not entirely absent either, which felt like progress. Deep, she said. Okay, he reached for the kit. I have a binding wrap. It won't fix it, but it'll make the next 4 hours easier. I know what a binding wrap is. I know you do. I'm still going to offer. She looked at him for a long moment, that copper-dark measuring look, the one that felt like she was counting things and arranging them into an order that satisfied some internal criterion he didn't have access to. Then she set down the cup. Offer accepted, she said. He worked with the same care he'd brought to the armor, steady hands, appropriate pressure, no more contact than necessary, completely aware of where she was and what she could and couldn't tolerate. She bore it without performance, which he'd expected. And when it was done, and she had straightened and taken a slow breath and found it marginally better, she said nothing for a moment. Then, where did you learn that? The binding, engineering core, technically, but mostly a field medic who didn't believe in waiting for the official training. He put the wrap away. She said the injury doesn't care about the curriculum. That is a useful perspective. She was a useful person. He glanced up. She's dead, 5 years now. Combat wound, later complications. He paused. I think about her approach a lot, not about her specifically, though that too, about the approach. The way she thought the obvious thing to do was help, and the obvious time to do it was now, and the obvious reason was that someone needed it. Eva was looking at him with the measuring quality softened into something that wasn't soft exactly, but was different. Less assessment, more attention. The door quality, the sense of something fractionally ajar. You came down to a crash site in the dark because it was there, she said. Because there was someone in it. You did not know that. I knew there was an impact signature. I knew a ship had come down. Probability of crew was yes, I knew. She tilted her head very slightly. The braid wrap had come partly loose in the crash, and a strand of dark hair had fallen forward across her jaw. She didn't push it back. Most people don't, he said. Yes, I know. She was quiet. The hull groaned once and settled. The dawn was full now, the light clean and neutral on the stone of the ravine, and the shadows had begun to shorten and change character, the flat light of early morning giving way to something with more dimension. You documented the failure mode, she said, while you were working. He looked up. She was looking at the notepad he'd clipped to the kit, the field notes he took as standard practice, the failure mode of the shoulder mechanism sketched out in the margins. Habit, he said. That is not a habit. She said it the same way she'd assessed everything else, matter of fact, not unkind. That is a discipline. Habit is something you develop without choosing to. You chose this. He thought about it. Yes, I suppose I did. Why? Because things fail in ways that are predictable, he said. And predictable things can be documented, and documented things can be fixed. The next person who comes down to a crash site with a locked Varath shoulder mechanism shouldn't have to figure it out from scratch. She was quiet for a long moment. He waited. The secondary joint, she said. The design flaw you identified. I have been arguing for 3 years that the secondary release is inadequately rated for battle condition deformation. I was told the variance threshold was acceptable. Her voice was even. I was shown modeling data. I was told the cases in which it failed were outliers. The cases in which it fails aren't outliers, he said. The cases in which it fails are the cases where it matters most, which is why nobody saw them coming. She looked at him. Yes. I'll send you the field notes, he said. When I've written them up properly, consider it evidence. Something passed through her face, not quite surprise, more like the adjustment that happens when something expected arrives by an unexpected route. That is, she stopped. Thank you, she said, simply without inflation. He nodded. I want to tell you something, she said, after a moment, and I find that I am uncertain why I want to tell you. He waited. He was good at waiting. It was part of the same discipline as the field notes and the 2 water canisters, and the habit of coming down to crash sites before anyone asked. The reason I fly alone, she said. When there is a reason, a pause. This was a transit flight. I had another pause. The 3rd Fleet Northern Reach Division is under significant administrative review. There are questions about command decisions made during the Varath engagement. My decisions. She was looking at the wreck, not at him. The investigation will take 4 to 6 months. During that time, I am technically on permitted absence. I am not technically doing anything irregular. She paused again. I am also not technically supposed to be in a Varath restricted zone, which is what Kessara III sector is classified as, for reasons that are extremely dull. He looked at her. She was still looking at the wreck. Her profile was clean against the ravine wall, the high planes of her face, the jaw still set, the posture still straight despite everything she'd been through in the last 3 hours and would be feeling more acutely by tomorrow. So the retrieval team, he said, will come because my locator transmitted, because they are obligated to come. She turned and looked at him. And because I matter in the specific bureaucratic sense to a significant number of ongoing administrative proceedings. She said it completely without vanity. There was no performance in it in either direction, neither self-importance nor false modesty, just the flat fact. I will be retrieved and I will be returned and the investigation will continue. She paused. I find I am telling you this and I find I am uncertain of the impulse. He thought about it honestly, maybe because I asked about the ribs first. She looked at him, something in her face not softening because that wasn't quite the right word for it. Opening, perhaps, a fraction, the way a door opens in a wall where you didn't know there was a door. Yes, she said, that is yes, that might be it. A pause shorter than the others. Most people, when they learn who I am, recalibrate toward the administrative fact of me, toward what I represent or what I cost or what I am worth to a given set of proceedings. She was still looking at him. You asked about the ribs. The ribs were the problem I could solve, he said. And the investigation is not. No. That's your problem. You're clearly equipped to handle it. He paused. The ribs were mine. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more the acknowledgement that a smile existed and was nearby. He noticed it and filed it with everything else. The retrieval team arrived in the 5th hour, which was half an hour later than the estimate, because the approach vector required an altitude adjustment that the team's navigator apparently hadn't anticipated. Davin heard the ship before he saw it and stood, stretching, and looked at Eva. She was already standing. Had been standing for the last 40 minutes, he suspected by design. She would meet her retrieval team on her feet. The ship was a Varath military courier, gray-blue hull, clean design, no weapon hardpoints visible. 4-person team, he counted when the ramp came down. They came toward her at a pace that was professionally measured and could not quite conceal the relief underneath. The first one down was a young officer, male, Varath, the Northern Amber Bronze, wearing a senior aide's rank stripe. He stopped 2 paces in front of her and pressed his right fist to his chest and bowed from the shoulder. Commander Sarath. Lieutenant Ven. Her voice was the same it had been the entire time, level, direct, carrying no more or less than what she meant. The ship is a total loss. I will submit the incident report upon return. The injuries are non-critical. Yes, Commander. He glanced just briefly at Davin and then back at her. Your medical team is aboard. Then we will proceed. She turned to look at Davin. He was standing at the edge of the shelter he'd packed away, his field kit over his shoulder, his hands loose at his sides. He met her look. She walked toward him, not toward the ship, toward him specifically, and stopped at the kind of distance that was closer than protocol and further than accident. "Davin Holt," she said. "Outer Reach Salvage Authority, 11 years. "That's right." She looked at him, the full copper-dark measuring look, long enough that Lieutenant Venn behind her had the grace to be very interested in the horizon. "The armor," she said, "the shoulder mechanism in particular, you understood it without instruction." "It's a mechanical problem," he said. "Mechanical problems have solutions." "Not everyone believes that." "No," he said. She looked at him for another moment. "I would like to contact you," she said. It was stated plainly, the way she stated everything, without softness or performance or the inflation of significance. Stated as a fact she was choosing to make available to him, take or leave. "I'd like that," he said the same way. She took a data chip from the interior pocket of her flight suit. He noticed she used the left hand, careful with the right, and held it out. He took it. Her fingers did not linger, but for just a moment before she drew her hand back, the edge of her fingertip rested against his palm. Not accidental, not quite. Then she withdrew her hand. She looked at him once more, level and direct, and then she turned and walked toward the ship, and she did not look back. But she walked straight. The message came 6 days later. It arrived through official ORSA channels, which was unexpected, and it was addressed to him by name with the ORSA identification attached, which meant she had taken the time to find out how to reach him correctly rather than using the data chip, which was the obvious thing to do. The message itself was brief. "Holt, the investigation is proceeding. It will take the time it takes. In the interim, I find myself with questions about Kessara III sector that I am not motivated to ask anyone else. I have attached the coordinates of a transit station in the neutral zone, where communications are not subject to fleet review. If you have questions about Varath interceptor mechanics that you are equally disinclined to ask anyone else, the channel will be open." The binding held, A. Sareth. He read it twice. Then he read the last line again. The binding held. He sat for a long time in the quiet of the relay outpost. His desk, his screen, the familiar hum of the station systems he knew the sound of so well he'd stopped hearing them years ago. And he thought about a woman who had been sealed in burning armor for 2 hours and hadn't called it anything other than a matter of degree. He thought about the way she'd met his eyes without flinching when the chest piece came away. He thought about the door that had opened in a wall he hadn't expected to find. He thought about the binding held 3 words at the end of a message that could have ended 5 words earlier. Not the mechanical assessment. Something else, offered without comment, just placed there, like a cup set near someone without ceremony. He opened a reply. "Commander Sareth, the channel is fine. Holt, P.S. The shoulder mechanism on Varath interceptors has a design flaw in the secondary release that most people don't account for. I'll explain it when you ask." He sent it. He went back to work. The next message came 2 days later, at a time of night that meant she had calculated or not calculated, which was its own answer, that she wanted to send it before morning. "What is the design flaw?" He smiled, alone in the outpost in the dark. "The secondary joint assumes both release channels will remain parallel under deformation load. They don't. Once the outer structure exceeds 12% variance, the channels separate and the mechanism jams from inside. You need to decompress the outer buckle first, independently, before anything else will move. I've attached the field notes I wrote up the morning after full documentation, with a geometry diagram on page 2. They're usable as technical evidence if you need to reopen the argument." The reply came back in 11 minutes. "I have been arguing for 3 years that the secondary joint is inadequately rated for battle condition deformation. I was told the variance threshold was acceptable. It is not acceptable. He thought about what to write. Wrote, "No, it isn't. The field notes should help. I dated them correctly night of the incident, documented before dawn so the chain of custody is clean." Another pause, shorter this time. "You wrote them the night of the incident." A beat, indicated by the second message arriving 2 minutes after the first. "You came down from a crash site, extracted an injured person, waited 4 hours for a retrieval team, and then went home and wrote up the field notes." Discipline asterisk, he wrote, "You called it that, you were right. I called it that before I knew the full scope of it." He looked at the screen. "Then you can revise your assessment." The next message took longer, 15 minutes, and when it came, it was different in register from the ones before. Still direct, still level, but different. "I don't tell people things," she wrote. "That is not a claim to virtue. It is simply accurate. I have commanded for 7 years. There is a particular distance that becomes habitual. You get very good at it. You stop noticing it. It becomes the baseline and you stop knowing there was ever anything else. You stop even noticing that it was a choice. It starts to feel like a fact." He read it, read it again. Then he wrote, "What does it feel like, noticing it again?" The reply took longer. "Strange and not unwelcome. That is what I am uncertain about. I do not have a framework for not unwelcome. I have very complete frameworks for threat assessment and operational pressure, and the kind of waiting that is itself a strategy. The other thing I am less well equipped to process." He sat with that for a while. Outside, Kessara III's night was full and still, the stars very bright at this altitude, the outpost a small warm square of light on the edge of a great deal of dark. He thought about what she was actually describing. Not the feeling itself, but the equipment problem, the sense of arriving somewhere she didn't have tools for. She was precise about it, which he appreciated. She wasn't overclaiming the confusion and she wasn't minimizing it. He wrote, "You don't need a framework for it. Just leave it there. The not unwelcome feeling doesn't need to be categorized before you're allowed to have it." That sounds remarkably simple. Most things that are hard to get to are simple once you're there. The difficulty is in the getting. Another pause. "I think I dislike that you are right about that." "You can tell me," he wrote. "I won't be offended." The reply came back very quickly this time. "I know," and then after a moment a second message. "That is part of it, the part I am sitting with." They wrote to each other for 8 more weeks. Not every day, sometimes 3 days passed and sometimes only hours. She was in the middle of an investigation that demanded her attention in concentrated bursts and left long stretches of enforced procedural waiting in between, and the messages came more frequently in the stretches. He read them when they came and answered when he had something true to say, which was more often than he'd expected. She had opinions about everything. Not performed opinions, not the kind people have because they feel they should, but the specific, considered kind that arrive only when someone has actually thought about something long enough to know what they believe about it. She had opinions about the heating grid problem he'd mentioned, which turned out to be more tractable than he'd thought when he applied the approach she suggested. She had opinions about the diplomatic history she was rereading, and they were different from the opinions she'd had as a junior officer, and she was interested in the difference. She asked him what he was reading. He told her. She sent him 6 pages of notes on a related text that had sat in his files for 2 years. He read the notes twice. In the 5th week she wrote, "The engineering division that handles the suit specification has not responded to the field notes. I find I am not surprised, but I am also a pause, indicated by the message arriving in 2 parts. I am angry. You are correct that angry is the more accurate word. I know," he wrote, "I'm sorry they're not listening. They will listen eventually. It is a matter of finding the correct lever." A pause. "I am choosing to believe that." "It's a reasonable thing to believe," he wrote. "You have the documentation. Documentation accumulates." "Yes, and then, You sound like you know that from experience. 11 years of aftermath, he wrote. Documentation is all we have most of the time. The thing itself is gone. What we can say about it is what remains. A longer pause than usual. That is a useful way to think about an investigation asterisk, she wrote. I find I am going to think about that. In the 7th week, she wrote, late at night. I want to ask you something and I find I am uncertain of the ask. He waited. What was it like, she wrote, when you came down the ridge, before you knew I was there? What were you thinking? He sat with that for a while before answering. He thought about the ridge, the dark, the smoke, the smell, the way he'd moved without slowing down. I was thinking about what I'd find, he wrote, whether the ship had come down fast or slow, whether the cockpit section had separated, because that's usually the difference. And I was thinking that if there was someone in there, they'd been in there for a while already, and that every minute I spent thinking about it was a minute I wasn't spending getting to them. You didn't know there would be someone. I didn't know there wouldn't be, asterisk, he wrote. That was enough. A long pause. When the reply came, it was one line. I think about the ridge sometimes, asterisk, she wrote. The light of your torch coming down through the dark. He sat with that for a long time before he answered it. He thought about what it meant that she'd said it, and what it meant that she'd said it the way she had, directly, without qualification, offered as a fact the way she offered most things. I'm glad it was visible, he wrote finally. I was moving as fast as I could. I know, she wrote, that is why I think about it. 3 months later, the investigation concluded. He knew it before she told him, because the ORSA clearance office forwarded him a copy of the Varath 3rd Fleet Northern Reach Command change notification. Pro forma, civilian sector. The kind of document that moved through 50 inboxes without anyone reading it, and he read it twice. Eva Sarath's name was on it, with a commendation rather than a censure, and the notation command reinstated. Full authority. The commendation language was formal, measured, precise. The kind of language that carries real significance under its controlled surface if you know how to read it, which he had learned to do in the engineering corps. He sat with it for a little while. He'd known, in the abstract, that the most likely outcome of the investigation was this one. Her own account of the Varath engagement had been internally consistent and strategically sound when she'd explained it to him, and the questions about her decisions had struck him from the beginning as the kind of questions that people ask when they need something to blame and they're willing to consider several targets before settling on one. The investigation had been the kind of thing that arrives not because someone believes a crime was committed, but because someone needs a process to be happening. He understood aftermath well enough to know the difference. But knowing the most likely outcome and receiving the actual one were different experiences, and he sat with both of them for a moment before he picked up the screen. He sent her a message that said only, "Congratulations, Commander." Her reply took 8 minutes. You saw the clearance notice before I contacted you. Salvage Authority gets routine fleet notifications. It's administrative. You read it. I read everything that comes through the station. A pause, then, yes, I read it specifically. Why? He thought about how to answer that. He thought about a woman sitting with her spine straight against a collapsed navigator's console, in sealed armor in a burning wreck, at 3 in the morning, waiting without complaint. He thought about the door in the wall. He thought about 11 minutes. He thought about the light of your torch coming down through the dark and what it had meant that she'd said it, and said it directly, offered it without qualification the way she offered everything that was true. He wrote, because you matter to me. That's a simple answer. I find simple answers are usually the ones that are true. The reply took a long time. When it came, it said, I am going to be in the Kessara sector in 11 days. There is a transit assessment I have been assigned, entirely legitimate, no restricted zone violations this time, and it will take me within reasonable distance of Kessara III. He smiled. The outpost has a reasonable landing pad, asterisk, he wrote. No burning ships required. That is a very low standard of hospitality. My hospitality is extremely practical. I have noticed that. A pause, then shorter than the others, 11 days, Holt. He sat in the quiet of the outpost with the stars coming in through the single east-facing window, and he thought about a shoulder mechanism and a design flaw, and a woman who had been arguing for 3 years about a threshold that was not acceptable. He thought about what it meant that she had told him so, and what it meant that she had told him the other things, and what it meant that she had counted the days before offering them. He thought about the way her finger had rested, for just a moment, against his palm. 11 days, he wrote. He went back to work. But the window stayed lit until considerably later than his usual end of day, and in the morning the transmission log would show 11 days' worth of messages marked read, reread, kept. He had a discipline for that too. She came on the 11th day exactly. The courier ship was a different one from the retrieval team, smaller, faster, her own configuration, which told him something, and it came in clean and level, and set down on the landing pad with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing with a ship and had a point to make about it. He was standing at the edge of the pad when the ramp came down. She was wearing a flight suit, not armor. The Varath officer braid wrap was back in its proper form, clean and correct. She moved with the slight careful quality that said the ribs had healed but not entirely forgotten, and she came down the ramp and stopped in front of him at the distance that was closer than protocol and further than accident. The same distance as before, he noted. She looked at him. He looked at her. Holt, she said. Commander. Eva, she said, in this context if you want. Eva, he said. He liked the way it settled, felt true. She looked around the outpost, the landing pad, the relay building, the ridge behind it, the wide gray-blue sky of Kessara III's morning. She took it in with the assessing look he knew now, the one that was cataloging but also underneath, simply looking. The ridge where he'd come down, the ravine out of sight beyond it, the quiet. It is very quiet here, she said. Yes. You chose it deliberately. 11 years ago, yes. She turned back to look at him. The copper-dark eyes were different in the morning light, more vivid, the amber showing up warmer in the direct sun than it had in the amber strips of the wreck, or on a screen. She was exactly herself. That was the thing he kept noticing. She was precisely, specifically herself, and had been from the first moment in the cockpit, and that was something he couldn't have named beforehand as something he was looking for and couldn't deny now that he'd found it. Something in her face was doing what it had done in the ravine, opening slightly at the edge. The door in the wall ajar, a little wider than before. I want to tell you something, she said, again. He waited. I've been in command for 7 years, she said. I am good at it. I will tell you that plainly because it is true and because I don't believe in performing false modesty about things that are real. I am good at command. I am less good at, she paused, looked at him with the directness that never flinched. At the distance becoming less. I have had considerable practice at the distance. I have had very little practice at the other thing. I find, another pause. I find I do not mind that. He looked at her. I know. I don't believe you mean that as a dismissal. I mean I know. I've been watching for 3 months. She was quiet for a moment. The morning moved around them. Wind along the ridge. The particular clean smell of Kessara III's atmosphere at altitude. The distant sound of the courier's cooling systems cycling down. What have you been watching? She said. 11 minutes, he said. When I sent the congratulations, you knew before the reply came that I'd read the clearance notice. You still asked why. You waited for the answer. He looked at her. That's not someone who wants the distance. That's someone who's been very good at it for a long time and has run out of the reason for it. Her chin lifted slightly, not defensively, acknowledging the way she acknowledged things directly without ceremony. "Yes," she said. "And 2 minutes," he said. She looked at him. "Which 2 minutes?" "The night you told me you had very good frameworks for operational pressure and poor frameworks for not unwelcome. You sent a second message 2 minutes after the first. You'd already sent the message you meant to send. The second one was the one you sent because you wanted to." She was quiet for a long moment. The morning light moved on the stone of the landing pad around them. "What did the second one say?" she said. "That you didn't have a framework for not unwelcome." He looked at her steadily. "You sent it anyway. You didn't need the framework." Something passed through her expression. Not the usual controlled assessment, not the measuring quality. Something warmer than those and stiller. "You are a remarkably direct man," she said. "I learned it from a field medic," he said. She said the wound doesn't care about the curriculum. The warmth in her expression deepened. That was the word for it, warmth, and it fit, and also looked like it was still learning the shape of her face. She had been so composed for so long with such discipline, that the feeling arriving visibly on her features had the quality of something new that was also something very old, something that had always been capable of this, simply waiting for the right conditions. Her hand came up, the right one, the one that had been trapped in the locked armor, moving fully now, healed, no careful quality to the gesture, and she held it out. He took it. Not a handshake, not exactly. Just her hand in his, both of them standing on the landing pad in the Kessara III morning, the ridge behind and the sky above and the quiet all around. Her grip was firm, steady, the grip of someone who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it. "I would like to come inside," she said, "and I would like if there is tea." "There is tea," he said. "And I would like to stay for a while." She looked at him steadily, with everything he'd been watching for 3 months in the quality of the look. "If that is acceptable." "It's acceptable," he said. She nodded once. Then she turned toward the outpost building, and he fell in beside her naturally, without adjustment, as if they'd learned this particular distance already, and they walked in together out of the morning light. He did not document this one. Some things he had decided you don't need to keep a record of. You just need to have been there for them. The record that matters is not the field notes or the damage assessment or the date and time stamp on a message sent at 11 minutes past the congratulations. The record that matters is being there, being the torch coming down the ridge, being the hands that knew which buckle to loosen first, being the one who asked about the ribs. The door to the outpost closed behind them, and the landing pad was quiet. And above the ridge the sky of Kessara III went on, very wide and very clear, the way it always did on a morning with nothing left to wait for.